Hello on this first day of December 2025. Here I have two of the caps that I have knit, two of about a dozen, which will be sold to help some fundraising with the chorus that I sing with. And I just wanted to show that off a little bit. I figured out that I have been knitting for 60 years because I learned how to knit in middle childhood. I learned how to do color pattern knitting at about the age of 15 or 16 and have been doing it ever since. I just love it. If you are left-handed, as I am, then you will find that knitting is rather left-handed, especially if you do the Scandinavian way. Now, I have been thinking more and more about the Piaget principles, and I happen to have picked up this used copy of the Essential Piaget, which is 850 or something pages long. It happens that Piaget has actually he did so much research that, for example, in his chapter 5, The Mind of the Baby, in a part called The Origins of Intelligence in Children. So he's got it divided, by a number of weeks, a number of months. For example, from birth to 6 weeks is reflexes. So a child who is reflexively pulling a barrette out of her hair, if she was lucky enough to have hair before 6 weeks. There's a history of bald babies in my family. Then that was just reflexive, not a thought process that involves words about sex and words about body. And then habits like sleeping, eating, etc., up until 5 months, up until 9 months, then coordination between vision and prehension. And I think that is the prehensile grasp, the coordination of reaching for something, grabbing something with your hand, and your eyesight. And up to a year, 12 months, is coordination between means and goals, meaning I see something I want, so I am going to crawl to it, or I want to get there faster. When I'm 11 to 15 months old or so, then I'm going to get up and walk. Before that, I don't want to be on my stomach anymore, and I'm going to roll over to my back. Okay, and then up to 18 months is discovery of new means, new ways to get at what you want. That often involves some verbalizations. And up to 24 months, 2 years, is some kind of insight, being able to predict. If I push the bowl off of my food tray on my high chair, then it's going to fall to the floor and make a mess. And that is a certain kind of insight. So that's enough of these Piaget details, but I'm going to also demonstrate something that I don't really have the right equipment for it, but this has to do with conservation of matter. And so I have a sort of big tall glass and a small glass. Usually Piaget was doing it with a tall and skinny beaker type thing, and then a wide container, also clear glass, so that, or plastic, so that you could, see the water. So, and you talk about the question. You have to be careful how you ask these questions so that you're not looking for a certain answer, but it's sort of like, is it more when it's in this glass that it seems to fill? Or is it more when it's in this glass, where it didn't even come halfway up? And that is one of the conservation of matter exercises. The other one, which I thought I could demonstrate, but it turns out this material that I thought was putty was actually a kind of paste, and so it's too fluid, and I can't do this, but the ball of clay and then rolling it out into a long roll. And does the child understand the conservation of matter, of that you didn't add anything to this ball? And often the child will say it's more when it's out in a long roll. And there's actually a whole exercise. Someday I will demonstrate that. There's a great exercise to do that's a fine motor kind of a thing, where the child first makes a ball and then makes a roll and then cuts into sections, counts the sections. Usually it's 6 or 7. And then they make little balls, out of them, and you can sort of talk about, and then at the end, after all the little balls have been rolled and lined up, then you make those into little flat pancakes and then smush them all together into the big ball. I learned that from my early childhood teacher, cousin Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. And it's just really, really good for children's fine motor development and for their logical thinking to have all of these kind of experiences. And I think that one of the most important pieces of our understandings in child cognitive development involves the idea that we do have to have experiences for them so that they can see all of this happening and come to these new understandings and explore the world this way in a curious, sort of intellectual way. And what I think Helen Webberley, who is continuing to get out all over the place on videos. You can look in my community posts to see, I think, 5 different links. Especially this I apologize for identifying Leo Kearse as an Irish comedian. He is Scottish. Thank you to the subscriber who corrected that for me. He did a really good collection of Webberley interviews going back a while, and the most odious that I found in that collection was towards the end, where she has a background behind her of as a picture. She must have, figured out how to have that in her background through, AI or something. And it was the gates of the concentration camp in Poland, Auschwitz, which I actually visited in 1980. And I regard any use of, concentration camps or Holocaust imagery in connection with sane people questioning so-called affirmative care and basically doing Dr. Mengele-like experiments on children. I regard comparing not doing those damaging things to children and our opposition of those damaging things, to compare it to genocide is really beyond the pale. It is absolutely despicable. So I am just trying to give you these tidbits of truth regarding child development in hopes that if you have a relative or friend who has been indoctrinated by a trans ideologue such as Dr. Helen Webberley, then um, you can start off your conversation or debate with your friend or relative with a few given understandings. Do you know who the child development researcher was named Jean Piaget, who worked starting about 100 years ago in Switzerland and came up with the 4 stages of child development, going from birth to age 14, and came up with the concept of object permanence and the concept of conservation of matter. Now, these are really not getting into the weeds. They are not hyper specialized concepts. Anyone who has taken care of young children has observed young children learning and developing their language and their cognition through experiences in the world. And what you are doing if you say to a child that they can change this objective reality of their body is like saying, I can magically make this water in this pretty cup, which I got for having tea parties with children long ago. I can make that water by the force of my willpower, my mind power. I can make that water flow upwards like backwards rain. Do you think that Miss Uta can do that through my powerful mind? And I would go through things like this every once in a while in my classroom when I was teaching early grade science. And what I found is that I was so convincing as a teacher that half of them would raise their hand and say, yes, Miss Uta, I believe that you can make the rain fall upwards by the power of your mind. And then the other children knew that, no, that I was making a false premise. And what I was really teaching them is that sometimes what we think is reality, what we think is probably science and evidence, which we might discover through experimentation and observation, is just a false premise. If you can't prove it, then it is a false premise. And you cannot prove that someone has an opposite sex brain inside their sexed body. You cannot prove that. My only last thing that I'm going to say here is that I specifically, because I saw this nonsense coming in and I experienced my then ex-husband's, by the time I was teaching in the classroom in public school in Brooklyn, he was already so-called transitioned. I knew that there was so-called science going around in the world being told to my sons, who came to me once. I remember it was in the fall after a weekend with Nettie. This would have been 1996 after he had the surgeries in the summer of 1996. It must have been September. And they came back and they said, but Nettie says that she was always a woman. And so, Mom, you married a woman. And so I had to set them straight about this. And I feel that it was very, very wrong of Nettie and his therapists to impose these falsehoods on our children. It just made their trauma about losing a father even worse. Now, what I was going to say is because I knew of all this stuff kind of creeping up into the big tsunami wave that started washing over us in 2015, I did not have the center in my kindergarten rooms, which people typically called housekeeping, and they had dolls, and they had little brooms, and they had a wooden toy iron, which was actually a dangerous weapon because it had a sharp point and it was this block of wood. So I always lost it. I couldn't figure out what it should be. I didn't want to make it into a paperweight on my desk because then the children will be too curious about it. But I had, instead of housekeeping, and I really didn't keep dolls, I kept animals for veterinary center. I called it the Pretend Center, and I had African animals researcher center. I had space station center. I had farmers market center, and it wasn't like some kind of super feminist thing where I'm saying, oh, ladies can be farmers too, or something like that, but rather I just didn't say anything about what girls do and what boys do because males and females, uh, you know, have been astronauts in space and have been, astrophysicists. And so I didn't feel any need to talk about what girls do and what boys do. And I specifically found, actually, when I started out and I had dolls and it was sort of like kitchen or family center or something like that, I found that everybody, boys and girls, argued about who got to take care of the baby. And I knew that they had dolls at home, and I felt that they can do that play at home. And the only dress-up things that I had was like a white lab coat. I didn't have hats too much because during that time in the early 2000s, there were waves of lice going on in the classroom, so I didn't want any hats or caps. But I had all kinds of little doctor kit and veterinary kit and stuffed animals, and for the African animal research center, I read some books about Jane Goodall. I didn't mention that she was the first woman to so and so and so and so. I didn't feel that that was necessary. I just presented Jane Goodall as a biologist, as an animal researcher, and I just went out of my way to find the different examples of males and females doing all kinds of things. And I really didn't need to talk about this as a boy thing and that as a girl thing. And that's what I think is good teaching. Children need to play with blocks. When I started out in the beginning of the year in my kindergarten classes, I actually assigned children to work in different play groups. And I determined where they're going to go, and I mixed the boys and girls in all the different centers. I would have two people at painting, and there was a boy at painting and a girl at painting. And I just didn't want to set a precedent where the boys choose this and the girls choose that, and therefore activities are sexed. And this, I think, is something that Webberley needs to answer to. Also, I really hate Barbie dolls. Barbie dolls are too sexy. They have an anatomically incorrect female body. And I couldn't believe it when I moved into some new classrooms and I would find old Barbie dolls in the closet. Into the garbage they went. Absolutely not. When I was little, I played with girl kind of dolls that looked like, if you want to talk about Mattel, like Skipper. Without, why do girls need to play with a doll, or boys need to play with a doll that has the Jane Mansfield, Dolly Parton kind of body? That doesn't make any sense. I feel like if you're doing that, you're teaching breastfeeding or something. All right, back to my raking outside. If you have trees, I advise to rake a collar of leaves around the base of the tree, put sticks on top to hold the leaves down, and you will protect the roots and keep them from drying out. And it's also giving sort of nutrition back to the tree because leaves, of course, decompose into beautiful, beautiful soil. Black gold, I call it. Get outside, take your walks, roll around on the floor, do your movement, and demonstrate your own centered mind-body connection. Thanks to all the new subscribers and the loyal stalwarts. See you the next time.